Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Phil Ponce. Coming up on the program, an editorial that fires up the president, Cook County Board President Toni PRECKWINKLE on some recent controversies, and the story behind a holiday favorite, the poinsettia. But first tonight, Chicago police officials have long admitted they struggle solving murder cases, often because residents are reluctant to come forward with relevant information. But just to the west of Chicago, the city of Rockford has seen an almost miraculous improvement in its murder clearance rate. That is the percentage of murders that result in charges being brought. The uptick coincides with a different approach to policing, one where police officers are literally embedded in the neighborhoods they patrol. Paris Schutz has the story.
She's a good girl.
In many ways, Rockford police officer Patrice Turner is just another resident of her neighborhood.
Come on. And you got your jammers hanging off.
But the sign on the front of her house attracts a lot of phone calls and house visits from her neighbors.
Everything from, I think I just saw a drug deal, to, hey, there's a barking dog. It's been barking for the last week and I'm tired of it, to, I mean, just anything at all. Hey, I need some help. Can you take me to treatment?
Turner says it is essential she live in the community she's in charge of patrolling because residents will trust her more. And that trust is a critical part of keeping the community safe.
If you live there, they are more apt to speak to you about those things. They see you every day and they kind of see you as more like just a regular person, a human being.
Turner is one of a handful of officers who live rent-free in subsidized housing because they've chosen to live within their police beat. Police Chief Dan O'Shea likens it to community policing on an exponential level and says that keeping the community safe comes down to performing the mundane, everyday tasks of a good neighbor.
Your job is to work on quality of life issues, build relationships, and drive down the crime numbers, not so much by arrest, but by going out and the kids drive by, they ride by, you're out there mowing your lawn, you sit around and talk to them, and they get their relationship with you. Their parents get their relationship with you.
The program is part of a reimagining of the police department under O'Shea's tenure, from one solely focused on crime fighting to one that now focuses the same amount of energy engaging with residents. O'Shea says he lets his officers spend a lot of their workday simply hanging out in the community.
I don't care if you spend a half hour at a coffee shop talking with people. Not 10 other cops, just sitting around talking to people coming and going, and you build relationships, as simple as that.
O'Shea says the department puts on 70 community events a year, everything from book readings to food drives to shopping sprees to sporting events. And he wants officers to build a rapport with Rockford's youngest residents so that they trust police as they get older.
Beat officers have to go to those meetings and have to go to the different functions. The detectives go to them, the command staff, the supervisors. Everyone goes to that, and that's who we are.
Gun violence claims another life in Rockford.
The shooting happened in broad daylight, and neighbors who heard the sounds didn't even realize they heard gunshots.
A 25-year-old man was also shot. He had serious injuries, but is expected to survive.
Like Chicago, Rockford has long struggled with a high murder rate and does not have a good reputation nationally for safety.
We knew we had to do better. I mean, we were consistently ranked nationally and definitely in the state for one of the most violent cities.
Building trust is a long-term solution, say local officials, but it's already had a staggering effect on one important statistic. After some success solving crime at the beginning of the decade, Rockford's murder clearance rate tanked to just 19% in 2015. It improved to 50% in 2016. It went up to 61% in 2017 and 76% last year. O'Shea says the city is on pace to solve 78 to 80% of its homicides in 2019.
Having the community step up and provide information is what solves crime.
O'Shea also credits improved technology and a consolidation of the detective units for the improved clearance rate. He says violent crime is down 30% overall since 2016. While Chicago has seen a similar drop in violent crime, the city's murder clearance rate remains extremely low.
It might not be a direct apples-to-apples comparison. After all, Rockford has about 1/20th the population of Chicago, but the two cities do have similar rates of violent crime per capita.
Interim CPD Superintendent Charlie Beck says he'll beef up community engagement while he's here. Last week, he announced the expansion of a pilot program where police give residents their cell phone numbers and work with them to solve quality of life issues.
People want to know who their police are. They want a relationship with their police. They want to be on a first-name basis. They want to recognize them. They want to feel connected, and they want to feel like their police officers believe not only in the difficult parts of policing, but also the social aspects.
Rockford police officer Patrice Turner says the community approach is a return to what policing used to be.
I don't think it's a new style. I think we've come full circle, and it's working.
Now, the Federal Housing and Urban Development Agency does offer subsidized housing to Chicago cops, along with firefighters, teachers, and emergency personnel to live in some at-risk neighborhoods. The CPD did not know exactly how many participated in that, but said the number was very low. For comparison, the murder clearance rate in Chicago has hovered around 20% and below in recent years, well below national trends.
So, Paris, could Rockford's approach work in Chicago?
Well, Phil, it's a complicated question, obviously because of scale. So Rockford, you know, an 80% clearance rate. The police chief is reporting about 18 homicides this year. Contrast that with a little under 500 homicides in the city of Chicago. So, you know, 80% clearance rate with that would be 400. Rockford sees between 18 and 26 homicides per year. It is going down according to police department numbers. And when you look at the clearance rate, you also have to look at things like rate of domestic violence, whether some of these murders are domestic related. Conceivably, those would be easier to grab a suspect if that's the case. But Interim CPD Superintendent Charlie Beck and former CPD Superintendent Eddie Johnson, they said over and over again that the low clearance rate in their mind is partially due to the fact that residents don't trust the police enough to come forward with information. The thought is with a higher clearance rate, there's a lower murder rate potentially because offenders are held accountable. Now, Rockford has struggled with high rates of violent crime. Giant leap in the clearance rate there is a very hopeful sign for that community.
Paris, thank you. And up next, the editor-in-chief of Christianity Today on his fiery editorial.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the City Club of Chicago.
Smart people may disagree about what makes a great city, but part of what makes Chicago great is that we don't have to agree. To run a city like ours, a lot of issues come up. The City Club of Chicago is a place to debate those issues and hear from the men and women who shape the policies, lead the industries, and tell the stories that define our city. For the free and open exchange of ideas, the City Club of Chicago.
President Donald Trump should be removed from office, so says the editor-in-chief of the influential evangelical publication Christianity Today. His editorial, published Thursday, reads in part, "To the many evangelicals who continue to support Mr. Trump in spite of his blackened moral record, we might say this: remember who you are and whom you serve. Consider how your justification of Mr. Trump influences your witness to your Lord and Savior. Considering what an unbelievable world will say if you continue to brush off Mr. Trump's immoral words and behavior in the cause of political expediency." Here to talk about the editorial and the backlash it has generated is its author, Mark GALLI, editor-in-chief of Christianity Today. And welcome to Chicago Tonight. First of all, describe the reaction you've received, both pro and con.
Well, it's been very, as you can tell, I'm on the show because it's been very intense. We normally expect, like on a typical day at Christianity Today, we might have 500 people viewing our site at any time. A really hot article might have 5,000 people. Our site crashed, and during the height of the interest, there was 15 to 17,000 people. This was way beyond anything we anticipated.
And in terms of the feedback?
The feedback has been mixed, as one could imagine. There has been a fair number of criticism, of course, but there has been a surprising number of passionate affirmations. I think the most typical affirmation I get to characterize it would be thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, and then 100 exclamation points. I'm glad someone said this. I now know I'm not crazy.
But in terms of the criticism, how would you describe it? Are you getting equal amounts of pro and con?
No. Well, it's hard to say total. What comes in my email box is very refreshing because it's 10 to 1-4. What comes in the company's mailbox is can be anywhere from 50-50 to 3 to 1 against. So it's mixed.
So the people who criticize the position they take, what are the kinds of points that they make?
Well, this is the thing that's been a little disappointing because I don't find very many of them actually making arguments against my arguments. They're saying things like, we should never criticize a sitting president because he's been put there by God, or you belong now to Christianity yesterday, you're so out of touch with the evangelical movement. I do think the more substantive reply has been, look it, he's done tremendous things for the pro-life movement, and hey, I'm pro-life, I think that's awesome. He's done tremendous things for religious freedom for Christians, especially overseas. They might list 2 or 3 other things they like that he's done.
Including the appointment of conservative judges.
Yeah, which has led to a more pro-life friendly judiciary, let's put it that way. So they'll say, in spite of his moral record, we think he's tremendous. And so that would be the argument against, the most reasonable argument
Well,
against.
as a matter of fact, the president has tweeted that there has been a good transactional relationship between him and evangelicals. Is that persuasive?
No, so that's the point. The point of my editorial is that had been persuasive in helping me charitably understand Trump supporters who said, on the one hand, he's not he's not an exemplar of charity or good morals, but he does deliver on these things. And it was with the impeachment hearings that something in me went click and just said, that doesn't work anymore. That balance doesn't work anymore.
What was that went click?
To be honest, I've been thinking about that, and I'm not sure, but let me give you an example. My wife, when she was in high school, they had this star running back who could just run circles around everyone, and the coach wanted him, but he was also had a very bad attitude, not a team player, late for practice, bad discipline. Eventually the coach said, in spite of all the good he does, he's actually sabotaging team morale and team unity. He's gone. And I think you see that in jobs, you see that where people see somebody that has strengths or bring something good to the table, and at some point you say to yourself, it's not worth it anymore. And for me, the impeachment hearings was the point where it's like click. I think we are giving up more in terms of our reputation, the reputation of the gospel, the reputation of the church, than we're getting for what Trump is doing for us.
But your editorial doesn't focus on policies. It focuses on morality.
Correct.
And for people who haven't read your editorial, what is the moral argument for the president's removal?
So the moral argument is that between his actions before and during the presidency that we all decry, his words at public events, his words in his tweets, culminating with his trying to coerce a leader of a foreign nation to get dirt on his political enemies, which is unconstitutional. But from our point of view, the more important thing, it's immoral.
Why is it immoral? If it, aside from the constitutionality of it, politically it might be, clearly it was dangerous, but why is it immoral?
Well, it's moral on the simple plain fact that he has promised to uphold the Constitution, and the Constitution says the President of the United States cannot bribe, and this is a form of bribery. Extortion is a form of bribery, so it's immoral in that regard. So that culminates in a moral, of course I'm stacking this up against an assumed knowledge of my readers about the Ten Commandments, the Sermon on the Mount. I'm not explaining everything all the way through. I assume they'd have that knowledge, and I come to the conclusion that he's morally unfit. Now, I think it's a good distinction you make. I'm not making a political argument. I'm not saying Donald Trump should be kicked out and we should put in this other candidate. That's not our interest. Our interest is the moral dimension of this whole thing.
Because the president tweeted, in a series of tweets actually, a far-left magazine, or very progressive as some would call it, which has been doing poorly and hasn't been involved with the Billy Graham family for many years. Christianity Today knows nothing about reading a perfect transcript of a routine phone call and would rather have a radical left non-believer who wants to take your religion and your guns than Donald Trump is your president. No president has done more for the evangelical community, and it's not even close. You'll not get anything from those Dems on stage. I won't be reading E.T. again. He meant C.T. I guess the magazine Christianity Today is looking for Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, or those of the socialist communist bent to guard their religion. How about Sleepy Joe? The fact is, no president has ever done what I've done for evangelicals or religion itself. Your reaction to those tweets, for example, are you?
That is almost a classic example of the president's tweets that mischaracterize, slander, and just tell outright falsehoods about things. He's right about one thing, and that is, no, we haven't had a relationship with Billy Graham personally for 20-some years. But the fact that we're far left, that's just a crazy assertion. The fact that we are championing Democratic candidates, that's just an absurd thing. The argument is that he's unfit for morally unfit for the presidency. I don't really care who gets in his place as long as they're morally fit. That would constitute dozens, if not hundreds, of candidates, Democrat or Republican. That's not my, I don't have a dog in that fight. I have a dog in the fight when there is the President of the United States acts in such a questionably moral way that I believe it affects not just his presidency and the reputation of the United States, but also affects the quality of life in America itself. I'm called as a Christian to love my neighbor, and if the head of state is doing things that it's actually making it harder for us to have conversations with one another, to treat each other civilly, to practice kind of standard, basic moral principles, that's a problem as far as I'm concerned.
As you know, a group of 200 evangelical leaders signed an open letter saying your editorial was offensive and that it targeted not just the president, but those who support him. Is that an accurate reading of your piece?
It is. Well, the fact that they were, I don't know if, they have to decide whether they're offended, but the fact that I was questioning their spiritual integrity, well, of course, a moral argument in an essay that says you ought to reconsider what you're doing because it has moral complications, yeah, I'm saying you need to, in a sense, repent and change your mind. Just like they're telling me you're being judgmental and arrogant and all these things, they're questioning my spiritual integrity, as well they should. They're brothers and sisters in Christ. If they think I'm doing something in error, they should say so. That I should be offended by that? I'm not particularly offended. I listen to what they say. I think, is it true? Is it not true? I pray about it. I think about it. And that's what I'm asking them to do. Yes, I'm asking them to question, to self-question their spiritual priorities. And if they come away after that serious prayer and conversation and say, we still stand where we will, I have nothing more to say. But in the meantime, I think I need to ask, as editor-in-chief of Christianity Today, some hard questions.
You write that you've said that you're concerned about the lasting impact on evangelicals as a result of the support of so many evangelicals for the president. What is that impact in your mind?
Well, the impact has already been felt. There for a few years now, people who are either evangelical centrists or people who are outside the evangelical faith and are looking at the faith and hearing the claims we make about what is true and right and good, and they see a large segment of the evangelical world defending or justifying or just simply ignoring, pretending it's not a problem, all the president's immoral actions and tweets. It causes, in the long run, it's going on so many causes that we care about, everything from pro-life to concern for the poor, for immigration. Why would people listen to us and say, these are moral and right things we ought to do as a nation? Why are they going to believe us if they're just going to point and say, well, what happened with your support over here? Why wasn't moral and ethics a really important part of your conversation with Donald Trump?
Billy Graham's son said his father would have been disappointed in the editorial and that his father voted for Trump. Your reaction to that?
So I didn't know his father as closely as he did. All I can say is based on Bill Graham's public statements, especially after his relationship with Nixon fell apart, it's hard for me to imagine that he would be an enthusiastic supporter of Donald Trump, but that's what I imagine. I honestly don't know enough to put a stake in the ground on that.
You've said that you have no expectation that your editorial will change the minds of Trump supporters, and why did you write it?
I wrote it, I think the thing driving me to write it at the moment was this was the right thing to say at the right moment. In retrospect, the positive effect it's having is, as I said, there's been hundreds, if not thousands, of emails and letters and phone calls that have said, thank you, thank you, thank you. I didn't know it at the time. I wish I was prescient to say, I saw this coming and I made a great decision. I didn't realize the depth of the passion that's how many people wanted an evangelical publication like CT to say, enough. And I'm happy that has happened.
Mark GALLI, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We very much appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
And we're back in a moment with Cook County Board President Toni PRECKWINKLE'S. Stay with us.
This evening's presentation of Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by AHMED, powering lives.
We have a tremendous source of untapped, efficient energy right here in our school. Let her rip, Jenny.
I kind of love this idea. The ComEd Energy Efficiency Program has real ideas for making schools energy efficient.
Pedal faster!
Toni Preckwinkle has just entered her 10th year as president of the Cook County Board. In April, she suffered a painful loss to Lori Lightfoot in the Chicago mayoral election, but has made her intention clear to run again for Cook County Board president in 2022, that is. Just last month, Preckwinkle announced the launch of the Southland Development Authority designed to spur economic growth in the South suburban economy. And joining us now is Cook County Board President Toni Preckwinkle. Welcome back to Chicago tonight. And for the record, you are running again.
Sure enough.
All right.
Good evening.
Good evening to you, ma'am. Give us a quick overview of what the Southland Development Authority is. What's it going to do?
Well, I think it's important to provide a little context here. You know, county government has two legacy responsibilities, public health and public safety, and that's where about 85 to 90% of our budget goes. But when I came into office, I said we've got to have a broader view of what we need to be doing, and so we put a real focus on economic development. We put together a Bureau of Economic Development and began to look at the county and our region in terms of, you know, what the needs were.
And you recognize a need, particularly in the south suburbs. What kind of a need?
Well, those parts of the country that have the best economic growth have the least inequality. And our region has tremendous inequality. Our 7-county region and also Cook County. And the part of our county that's struggling the most economically is the south suburbs. And so that's where we've focused our attention. That's where we've made our infrastructure investments, our investments in affordable housing, and our focus on economic development. And part of that is our South Suburban Economic Growth Initiative, which resulted in the recommendation that we form a development authority, and that kicked off in November.
I see. Well, let's back up to some other topics that are still very much on the minds of residents of Cook County, and that is, this isn't your exact bailiwick, but as a Cook County Board President, can you give us an update on where things stand on property tax reform?
Well, Fritz Kagi was elected assessor in part to look at our property tax assessment system, and he's been doing that for the last year and a half. I think if you want to know more detail about how he's proceeding, you should talk to him. But every 3 years...
Are you satisfied that things are getting turned around as someone who has countywide responsibility?
Well, I think we're making progress in making our property tax assessment system more equitable and fair, both in relation to how high and moderate and low income residential properties are treated and how residential properties are treated in relation to commercial and industrial property.
One of the things that got his predecessor in trouble, that he's reportedly under federal investigation for, Joe Barrios, that is that the concern that he gave out favorable tax assessments to the wealthy and politically connected in return for favors. Can you tell us anything about the status of that investigation?
I have no idea. All I know is what I read in the papers.
All right. Well, there are multiple ongoing federal investigations into city, county, and state politicians, including Cook County Commissioner Jeff Tobolsky. Should he resign from the county board?
Look, you know, I think these investigations are surely discouraging. But it's important to remember the context. You know that I'm a history teacher. Context is everything. We have more than 3,900 elective offices in Cook County. 3,900. That's local library boards, park district boards, it's village trustees, it's members of the state legislature.
Yeah, but how many county board commissioners do you have?
No, but wait a minute. You talked about ongoing investigations more broadly, and what I'm suggesting to you is if we have 3,900 elective offices and 3 people have been charged with a crime, 3 people, that's less than 1%, Phil. And it's discouraging both that there's these ongoing investigations and that there's no context provided by the media.
Maybe you can give us some context on another issue that's been in the news regarding your security detail is why was the funding for your security detail transferred from your office to the Forest Preserves?
Because we decided that it was important that they be in a law enforcement agency, and the only law enforcement agency that we had was the Forest Preserve District.
That simple?
Yeah, that's simple.
Because it's
the Department of Homeland Security, it's now called Emergency Management and Regional Security, is not a law enforcement agency. And these folks needed to be law enforcement officers.
I see. It just seems kind of counterintuitive to an average citizen to for a security detail for the county board president to be paid out of the Forest Preserve.
The Forest Preserve has a police department, and they have law enforcement officers. They call them LEOs, L-E-O.
The population loss in Cook County is an issue that's causing concern. Why is the county losing population?
I don't know. That's a complicated. That's a complicated question. Let's talk about
theories.
Well, let me talk about what we're trying to do. At the moment, our focus is on the census and its importance to not just Cook County, but to our entire state.
What's at stake for the county, particularly?
Well, what's at stake for us is what's at stake for every local unit of government, and that is financial resources. You know, a number of federal programs are per capita based, that is per person, and the more people you have, the more money you get. So if the county does not have a complete census count, we don't get the federal resources to which we're entitled, and so that's a big issue. But the other big issue for all of us is our congressional delegation. It's quite clear, given demographic changes, that we're going to lose one congressional seat, and if we don't have a good count, we might lose two. And that affects our gravitas, our heft in Washington.
So what is being done, what are you doing to ensure that there's a good census turnout?
Well, we devoted,
or an accurate census turnout.
First of all, I want to commend Commissioner Moore, who insisted in our 2019 budget that we think about the census in 2020, and we allocated $2 million to outreach efforts in our 2019 budget and $2 million more in 2020. So the county's going to spend $4 million to support local efforts, local municipal efforts, and community organizations in their efforts to reach out to those who might otherwise not participate in the census and not be counted.
Let's talk about marijuana, because the state is going to be issuing 75 more licenses for marijuana dispensaries in the state. Do you know how many of those might be coming to Cook County?
I don't know. We put a cannabis commission on the agenda in December, and we're going to look at passing that in January and kind of look at what our opportunities are and where we might be able to ensure equity in those licenses going forward.
And the county board has proposed a 3% tax on recreational cannabis sellers. How much money might that raise?
We're not anticipating any revenue in this cycle. Municipalities can't start collecting until, as you may know, July 1, and there's a delay in the receipts from the state. The state does the collection, then they turn the money over to the local units of government. So we're not anticipating revenue. There may be some modest revenue, I'm not sure.
But down the road, when everything is in full operation, what might the range of income be?
To be determined.
I see. Mayor Lightfoot, what kind of a working relationship do you have with the mayor?
Well, you know, we got together in July and talked about some opportunities for collaboration, and talked again in August, and our staffs have been working together on the census and on racial equity issues.
How often do you personally talk?
Not very often.
You're reported to have had at least a couple of conversations about areas that the city and county could collaborate on, and one issue where there seems to be an impasse is a plan to increase ridership of Metro Electric and Rock Island lines. The mayor is reportedly concerned about losing CTA riders. Any closer to a deal on that?
Well, let me just talk about the genesis of this. You know, we worked for 3 years on a long-range transportation plan, and the county had not done one, I'm ashamed to say, for 70 years. The last one was 1940. So in order to get federal resources, we had to have first a Department of Transportation and then a plan. So we put together our plan, and what came out of it was the notion that we had to have a much broader view of what constituted transportation. It couldn't be just roads and bridges. It had to be bike paths. It had to be public transit. It had to be freight. And
so it's not as easy as just more riders for Metro might impact CTA.
No, here's the thing. I just talked about the importance of economic development in the Southland. Okay, the south side of Chicago and our south suburbs are economically challenged. And one way in which you can increase opportunity is to increase access to public transit. So our proposal, and we're working with Metro, we hope to have a memorandum of understanding signed soon, is to increase service and decrease fares on the Metro Electric on the east and the Rock Island on the west, which serve the south side of Chicago and our south suburbs. And we think that's good for economic development in those regions.
Cook County Board President Toni Preckwinkle, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Phil.
An Illinois car manufacturer gets the green light from a new major funder. Amanda Vinicki has that story and more of what's making news in Chicago tonight. Amanda.
Phil, Rivian's raised $1.3 billion in funding from T. Rowe Price. The electric vehicle startup's based in Michigan, but its manufacturing headquarters, its factory, is in central Illinois in Bloomington Normal. The so-called electric adventure vehicles made there are meant to drive 400 miles before needing a recharge. They're set to hit the market late in 2020. Amazon and the Ford Motor Company are also funders. Amazon's also put in an order for 100,000 electric delivery trucks, meaning that Rivian's racing ahead in the electric vehicle race, at least when it comes to investors. Chicago's eroding shoreline's been reinforced with concrete boulders and riprap at Howard Beach. The city's transportation department says crews will complete work this week on that phase of a lakefront stabilization project. Workers today also got started carrying out a winter flood protection plan at Rogers Park Beach. More work set for the new year when the Army Corps of Engineers will perform erosion protection along the south lakefront from 49th to 50th Streets. A pair of storms earlier this year and the 12-foot-high waves they brought damaged beachfront infrastructure and the waters covering beaches. Lake Michigan's historic water levels are projected to remain high through spring. A new state commission has about 3 months to give recommendations on ethics in Illinois government. Members got started this morning. It comes amid a sprawling federal probe that's already resulted in the resignation of a state senator and a state representative. Republican and Democratic lawmakers alike say the early work went well and that there is a shared interest in transparency. But there's a sign of early partisan fissure. GOP legislators say they want to cover campaign finance, while the Democrats who lead the group say that's outside their scope. More on our website. As for the weather, mostly cloudy tonight with a patchy fog and a low around 34 degrees. Tomorrow, again foggy and unseasonably warm with a Christmas Eve high near 51. Now, Phil, back to you.
Thanks, Amanda. Still to come on Chicago tonight, how a flame red shrub became the unofficial houseplant of Christmas. And what about a break from all that holiday shopping and picking up a book? We have local bibliophiles with their wintertime reading suggestions. But first, some of today's top business headlines. Here's Crane's Chicago business editor, Ann Dwyer.
Thank you, Phil. Boeing has given CEO Dennis Muhlenberg his walking papers. This after months of bad PR, public floggings on Capitol Hill, and a global grounding of the most important model in Boeing's commercial aviation fleet. Muhlenberg joined the company as an intern in 1985 and rose through the ranks to become CEO in 2015. But his handling of the crisis surrounding the crashes of two 737 MAX planes recently led the company's board to strip him of his chairmanship, and today the company announced he's leaving altogether. Board chairman David Calhoun, a GE executive, will replace Muhlenberg as chairman on January 13th. Meanwhile, a proposal for a $20 billion mixed-use complex and transit center west of Soldier Field is regaining some momentum. The proposed One Central project was given extra time to apply for a federal loan. Instead of the end of the year, project developers now have until September 30th. The provision for the extension was tucked into a must-pass bill funding operations of the federal government. Up next for the One Central project, developers will have to pitch the idea for what essentially amounts to an entirely new neighborhood to Mayor Lori Lightfoot and nearby residents. And finally, Sears is offloading another longtime brand. Advance Auto Parts will buy Die Hard, the struggling retailer's car battery brand. The move follows news earlier this year that Sears had hired investment bankers to advise on potential asset sales, including Die Hard. Sears has spent the last several years selling key brands to generate cash. In 2017, it sold the Craftsman tool brand to Stanley Black & Decker. For Crane's Chicago Business and chicagobusiness.com, I'm Ann Dwyer. Back to you, Phil.
Thank you, Ann. Poinsettias, or poinsettias, are nearly as common as Christmas trees this time of year. The holiday flowers are actually shrubs native to Mexico. Most of the ones we see come from California. But there are some greenhouses in Illinois that cultivate them, as Amanda Vinicky found out when she visited a poinsettia farm in Woodstock a couple of years ago. This particular place just closed up for the season, but here is another look at it when it was in full swing a few holiday seasons ago.
Bob Colsey begins to fashion a wreath with the dexterity of someone who spent a lifetime working with evergreens. His dad actually got his start in 1949 selling lilacs from a farm stand. It's been flowers and then Christmas trees ever since. Together, they built this greenhouse in Woodstock from scratch. But it wasn't until 2003 that they began to grow all of this, a sea of poinsettias, and not just your run-of-the-mill reds.
These here winter rose right here I think are one of the most unique because it's actually a poinsettia it has a double bract. If you notice, it looks like rosebuds. It's called winter rose, and it's just different. I think people like them because they're different.
Others look marbled, speckled, dipped, and dyed.
Ruby Frost, Green Envy, Ice Punch, Burgundy, some hybrid, Pink Ruffles, Jingle Bell Rock, and Polly Pink.
Colsey's favorite.
That red glitter where it looks like God has just sprinkled it with white paint. And he's like, I'll do it this way and I'll do it that way. And I think that I can't get enough of that.
Selling poinsettias, that's common enough this time of year. But growing them, that's a whole different matter. Colsey's used to ship them in.
We decided the quality wasn't quite good enough for what we wanted to do for our customers. So we decided we're going to tackle a new crop, being the poinsettias. So we had to teach ourselves how to grow them.
Each July, Colsey gets 5,000 cuttings, plants about 2 inches tall. Then he and his crew spend from summer through Thanksgiving tending them. That's no easy chore, and it is a chore. Colsey says they're the most demanding plant he grows.
We gotta trim them, we gotta pinch them, we gotta space them, we gotta speed them up, we gotta slow them down, we gotta turn up their heat, turn down their heat. The bugs are attacking them. They don't be like, we can wait, a couple days and do that. No, we need to be after it.
The trick isn't just keeping them alive. The team has to cultivate the crop so it's at its fullest, brightest, and boldest around the holidays. Also, customers like Bev Tixon will be stunned.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, that's for her mother.
And the color, it's like a rainbow of holiday out there. So when you look, it's just it's gorgeous.
Reaching this point requires getting the temperature just right. Colsey hangs thermometers from a toggle system so they can rise with the poinsettias as they grow, and they're watered from underneath so their growth isn't disturbed.
There's a lot of similarities between plants and people. If you give a person everything they want, or if you give a plant everything he wants, he kind of grows wild and he doesn't have discipline. If you take away his water, he might stay a little shorter, a little stockier. I turn down your temperature. I think people, if they're put through some trials and tribulations, I think that builds their character, and that's how I grow these plants. I build them and I grow them and I look at them. You're too short, I'm going to make you bigger. You're too tall, I'm going to chill you out. I grow the plants like I think life can be.
For all of that, Colsey promises they're easy enough to tend to once you get one home. Colsey's recommends watering your poinsettia weekly. A guide is on the Chicago Tonight website. Keep them in natural or artificial light, somewhere where it's between 60 and 70 degrees ideally, and away from any draft, hot or cold. Then keep disturbance to a minimum.
So what it means to you, if you brought a poinsettia home, set it, make sure it's the way you like it, leave it. Its job is just to sit and look pretty.
Set it and forget it.
Set and forget.
If you're worried about having a poinsettia and a pet, Colsey says no need to worry. A cat would have to eat 50 pounds of the leaves, a dog 100, in order for it to be toxic.
Come January, Colsey will clear out vestiges of the holiday from his greenhouse. Any remaining poinsettias will become compost. In July, a new batch of poinsettia cuttings will arrive, and a little bit of holiday cheer will once again take root. For Chicago Tonight, I'm Amanda Vinicky.
The colorful part of the poinsettia, by the way, isn't the flower. The spear-like colored leaves are actually something called bract surrounding the flower. And as for the debate over how to actually pronounce the plant, Amanda asked Bob about that, and he told her it's whatever the customer wants to call it, but he prefers poinsettia, so that's what we went with. But some authoritative sources insist that it's actually poinsettia. As we mentioned earlier, Bob's is closed for the season, but it reopens in April with flowers for spring. And now to Paris Schutz and some winter reading suggestions. Paris.
A cold winter day provides the ideal time to get cozy by the fireplace and dig into that stack of books you've been putting off for most of the year, at least if you're me. Joining us with their top picks of the season are Todd Van Luling, a senior culture reporter for HuffPost and managing editor of the Chicago Review of Books, a publication that focuses on books and authors in the Midwest. SAMIRA AHMED, author of young adult books Love, Hate, and Other Filters, and the forthcoming Mad, Bad, and Dangerous to Know. And Rachel Weaver, co-owner of the independent bookstore, The Book Table in Oak Park. Welcome all of you to Chicago Tonight.
Thank you for having us.
Rachel Weaver, is there a difference between the kind of book you want to cozy up with in the wintertime versus a beach read in the summer?
I don't think so necessarily. I think if it's a good book, it's a good book, and you can read it whenever, but some of us might have a little longer attention span in the winter without, beach trips and so forth.
Samira, what about that?
I mean, I think for my beach reads, I kind of compare them to like chocolate cake, and my winter reads are like a cozy cup of tea. So chocolate cake is something I want to like devour, and it's delicious, of course. And my tea is also delicious, but it might have some more, might have some more complex notes. I might linger over it a little longer.
It's giving you some substance too. Yeah. How about you, Todd?
Yeah, I think in the winter that kind of gives you a chance to sort of look back and look at the books that maybe you missed throughout the year, and maybe you saw that review, maybe you saw that praise, but missed it throughout the year, hanging out with the family. Maybe you want to step away and take some time to look back. But
I find it difficult, though, to focus when you've got, holiday shopping to do and work and all that. Anyway, let's dig right into your picks. Todd Van Luling, your pick is Rusty Brown is your best book of the year. Not exactly your traditional novel. Explain it.
Yeah, so this is a graphic novel by the Chicago artist Chris Ware. It came out just in September, and I picked this as a sort of winter read specifically. And so why I kind of did that is because just in the first couple pages, Chris Ware is musing about snowflakes and already relating them to the human condition, and it kind of, one, sets you in the mood of hopefully seeing some snow outside, certainly if you're staying in Chicago, but also sort of reflecting on existential thoughts.
Right, I was going to say, it's kind of a metaphysical book here, not your traditional sort of plot line.
Yeah, Chris Ware has actually described it as a sprawling mess, but he's also very self-effusive, or self-effacing. Self-effacing, yeah, that's the word we're looking for. So he describes it as trying to focus on the snowflake as a plot structure, and so part of that is focusing on different human stories and how they connect, and how some people might relate to each other, how some people might be different from each other and unique.
All right, definitely a better winter read than beach read. SAMIRA AHMED, Red at the Bone. This is your choice for best book of the year. Tell us about it.
Red at the Bone by Jacqueline Woodson is a stunning and lyrical novel. It's spare. It's a story about two families and how they're brought together by an unexpected pregnancy. But it spans like generations, and it really speaks to ideas of how the past can shape us, but how we can also define ourselves. And I think part of what I love about all books is that I want them to ask me questions, to compel me to sort of seek the answers within the pages, but also to give me a little bit of a sense of hope. It's an incredibly layered novel, and it speaks to the notions of like violence, racism, sexism, intergenerational trauma, and how that can affect us as individuals, and how each of us as individuals, also tries to seek to set ourselves apart from that, because we want to define ourselves for ourselves.
This is definitely your hot tea novel here
Yes,
for the year.
definitely.
Okay, Rachel Weaver, Make It Scream, Make It Burn, your selection. Tell us about it.
So Leslie Jamison is an essayist. She's a journalist. She writes memoir and a little bit of criticism. And she's able to just take almost any subject and run circles around it in a way that just makes it so much more in-depth and interesting than you would expect.
And to be clear, this is a selection of short stories.
It's essays, actually.
Essays,
It's nonfiction essays. My favorite essay in the collection is an essay she writes about the outsider artist Annie Appel, who is known for spending 25 years of her life documenting one Mexican family. And she becomes so enmeshed in their lives that she almost becomes a part of their family, which sort of is contrary to the way most people think of the way art should be performed. About halfway through the essay, Leslie Jameson lets out the secret that she is also friends with Annie Appel. So it becomes this sort of, this layered look at objectivity, whether objectivity is possible or even preferable, and it's just a different way of looking at art and subject.
Kind of sounds like a Joan Didion type collection of this.
Very much so, yes.
All right, so it's difficult to pick a favorite. You've got a second round here, your second favorite book of the year, so to speak. Todd, it's a how-to book on how to do comics. Explain that to us.
Yeah, so I thought for end of the year, this was a particularly good suggestion for people who are looking to give a gift or for maybe a New Year resolution as you're trying to kind of pick up a new skill or hobby. So Linda Berry is a Midwestern author. She lived in Chicago briefly, but she won the MacArthur Genius Grant this year. So this is a pretty good place to start for if you're looking for someone to kind of instruct you and walk you through something. But what she does really well is this is not like a very academic way to teach something. She meets you right at the most easy beginner level, the most humorous level, and she kind of walks you every step of the way to even take little steps to get better at drawing, but it could be better at any craft you're trying to pursue.
And as I understand, it's for anybody, even those that think they have no talent at all.
Exactly. Yeah, I certainly have no drawing talent. I'm very much a stick figure drawer, but within the first couple of pages, I felt like I was learning something.
I put myself in the same category. SAMIRA, AHMED, your second choice is a young adult novel, 13 Doorways, Wolves Behind Them All, but you think this is good for all ages?
I think anyone and everyone should actually read this. It's a beautiful novel by Laura Ruby, who's a Chicagoland writer, and 13 Doorways, Wolves Behind Them All is actually set in Chicago, as we leave the Depression and head into World War II, and it's a ghost story. It's a story told by a ghost, and also it's a story of a young woman who is alive and is a half orphan, meaning she was put in an orphanage, though she still had a living parent. Her father put her into this orphanage, and it's actually based on a true story from Laura's mother-in-law, and it's actually it's just heart-wrenching because it's just about these young women who are trying to find their way in a world that is saying to them, like, you have this certain place, your place is only to do these menial tasks or to be stuck in this orphanage, and we are going to define you. You can't define yourselves. And for both of these young women, both the ghost and this young girl who's in the orphanage, they are fighting against that. They're trying so hard to just live their lives, and yet they're asking in a way for so little. It's just the freedom to be who they are. And it has tragic turns, it has beautiful turns, and I think ultimately it's also a novel about hope, which I think is very much, I think it's also so critical for young adult fiction to be that way. And I think for young people at that age, they're facing a lot of doorways, and they're not quite sure what's behind them. And for these young people in this novel, when they open them, they're going to figure that out.
Obviously, this is a genre that you know very well and you're very familiar with. Rachel Weaver, Conviction, you call this tartan noir. Can you please explain what that genre is?
So she is Scottish, which is where the tartan comes from. It's part of it's sort of a subgenre of thriller or mystery where very dark sort of elements of like American noir, but with just a very Scottish type of brogue to it, so to speak.
So you can hear the brogue when you read it.
Oh, absolutely. There's one passage where she describes someone's laugh as so dark and wild you could drown bags of kittens in it. And she just has just tremendous writing talent, and it's very hard to put down. I've always loved her, and this is one of her best, and it's a standalone novel if you're not looking to start a big series of mystery novels.
Gotcha. All right. Well, so since we're moving to the end of a decade, we asked you to pick your best books of the decade. Todd Van Luling, this is by a familiar author, one we know and miss very much, Life Itself by Roger Ebert. Why'd you select this?
Yeah, so this was a memoir that came out in 2011, sort of starting off the decade, but Roger Ebert is certainly someone who's inspired me throughout my career and just life in general. But this is a memoir that is for people who are certainly interested in Roger Ebert, but also in an earlier time in Chicago history, people who are interested in the value of having a community, and he was very much someone who was part of the Chicago community and would lean on others and be someone who could be leaned on. And this is a book that has stuck with me throughout the decade. And
certainly part of the nightlife community with Ricardo's and
sure.
Old Town Ale House.
Leaning on each other in different ways.
Leaning on each other in different ways. Yeah, obviously so much more to Roger Ebert. SAMIRA Ahmed, Exit West, your best book of the decade. Tell us about that.
It was so hard to choose, but this is a beautiful and lyrical novel, and I think it speaks so much to questions that I think arose in this decade. You know, what are ideas of what it means to be a displaced person, issues of refugees, border and identity, and nationalism and patriotism, and it speaks to so many of those things. And it's about a young couple falling in love in an unnamed city, but it's a war-torn city, and it becomes an increasingly dangerous place for them to live. And then there's these rumors that are starting to spread about doors, literal portals to safer worlds. So there's a twist of magical realism in this. And they have to make this choice of whether they're going to leave their homeland, whether they're going to leave everything they love for the quote-unquote safety of the new world to them. And they don't know where the portal leads.
An anonymous homeland. It's not.
It's an anonymous homeland. It's. I think when readers read it, they'll see that the city is loosely based on Lahore.
Okay.
But it asks these questions, and even though they're seeking a safer place to live, a better place to live, they have to leave everything behind and rip a piece of themselves apart. And what does that mean? And what does it cost us? And how do we build a new life in a totally foreign place?
Sounds fascinating. Rachel Weaver, your best book of the decade. You too can have a body like mine.
Right, and I swear it is not a diet book. It's actually a novel. It's a first novel, and it's a very recognizable world that is also nothing like our world, but exactly like our world. It's, you know, everything is marketed and to use so heavily and very consumer driven, and but it all has this sort of like creepy cult-like feel to it instead. Whether it's this chemically snack cake that is called Crazy Cakes that they advertise, or there's in fact there's an actual cult in the book, but. There's even a grocery store where they walk through the grocery store, and when you can't find something, and you try to ask for help, they say, I'm sorry, you need to continue on your product journey. And so it's just this very curious book, but the best way I could describe it would be like a young female Don DeLillo white noise. It's a very creepy but funny book all at the same time.
All right, well, these are all fascinating choices. We thank you very much. We'll have to have you back for your summer beach reads, the chocolate cake books. Todd Van Luling, SAMIRA Ahmed, and Rachel Weaver, we appreciate your selections. And you can find excerpts to these winter reads and others we didn't have a chance to get to on our website. While you're there, tell us your favorite book from the past decade. And now, Phil, back to you.
Thanks, Paris. And that's our show for this Monday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. We will be off tomorrow and Wednesday, but we'll see you back here on Thursday night. Join us then. It's beginning to look a lot like tax season, and we've got some smart year-end tax moves. Plus, newly discovered pictures of Chicago in the 1950s by a master photographer. And we leave you tonight with some of the members of the Chicago Symphony Chorus singing "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas" and "We Wish You a Merry Christmas." You can watch the full performance on our website. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Phil Ponce. Thank you for watching. Good night and happy holidays.
Have yourself a merry little Christmas. Let your heart little Christmas We wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year. Good tidings to you wherever you are. Good tidings for Christmas and a Happy New Year. And a Happy New Year. We all know that Santa's coming. We all know that Santa's coming. We all know that Santa's coming, and soon we'll be here. Good tidings.
Possible in part by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, wishing all a happy and healthy holiday season.